Hello, this video is about how you can take a peer editing exercise you may have used in the past in written paper form and make it a little bit more automated, especially if you have an online class, so that it streamlines things a little bit. And my name is Catherine Cameron, and with me is...
I am Ashley Chase.
And we both work at the College of Law at Stetson University in Gulfport, Florida. I'm a research and writing teacher, and Ashley is the associate director of our library, but she is also the on-campus tech guru. So when I wanted to take what I had done in the past in paper form as far as peer editing goes and turn it into something in online form, she is the person I reached out to. Because like me, she wants to be a tech geek. Am I right, Ashley?
That's correct. And Catherine refers to me as a tech guru because we are friends and she likes to say nice things about me. But the fact of the matter is, when we first started playing with this, it took me forever to figure out how to do it. And it ended up being quite simple. And so we wanted to share this in the hopes that it will streamline processes for other people who are struggling to teach online or to transition from normal in-person exercises to online exercises, or for people who are teaching dual delivery this semester who may be struggling to connect their students who are in class and outside of class. So hopefully this will sort of tie everything together for things like peer review exercises.
You got it. So I'm going to start off by showing you our starting point. I used to have a checklist when I would have students pull a rule statement out of a case for them to assess their rule statement or assess the rule statement of somebody else in the class. And so I would ask my students to draft a rule statement out of a case, bring it to class one day, swap papers, and then I had this little checklist that was on paper form that they also swapped. And that was pretty easy. It was a little bit of chaos in the room for a few minutes, but it was pretty easy for them to track where everything was going and to get everything back. When I moved to an online environment, I thought that was just going to create a nightmare because the only way to really swap things around was going to be through email. And I figured one email swap might be okay, but if I had a bunch of people peer editing each other's work and they were having to create peer editing forms and send them around, it was just going to be a nightmare. So I wanted to automate some of it. And the thing that I thought I could automate relatively easy would be the actual peer edit form itself. And so what you're looking at now is a Microsoft Forms that I created. And there are videos out there to do this with Google Forms, but unfortunately our email system didn't like the emails that were sent from Google Forms. So we wanted to do it with Microsoft Forms because that was an in-house technology that wouldn't cause our email system problems. And because we couldn't find a video on it, we thought it might be helpful to share one with you all. So here's my Microsoft Forms that I created, and this is just a demo of my rule statement evaluation. And if you want to know how to set up forms, there's all kinds of videos you can watch on that. It's relatively easy and intuitive. But in here, I just simply ask students to give me their name and then to click on who they are assessing. And this is actually a pretty critical step in this process. Because the way we have set this up through Microsoft Power Automate, also called Microsoft Flow, it needs some sort of input of an email address in order to email the peer edit to the appropriate person. And so if you decide to do this, you are going to need to set up a question somewhere in your evaluation form that asks the person inputting the information what the email address is of the person they want the evaluation sent to. So usually that is the author of the document that somebody is assessing in a peer editing setup. And so I did it this way by putting the name and then the email in these little brackets. And by doing that, the Microsoft system does recognize that that's an email address to send it to. You could just put the email address if you wanted to, and you could also have somebody manually input the email address, but you need to have some sort of question that solicits an answer that is an email address for this to work. And so I just set this up. And then I put my questions in that I wanted to ask the students about their legal issue and whether it was clear, their rule statement, I'm sorry, whether it's clear, whether it applies to the legal issue, and then I gave them a chance to throw in some other information. So pretty simple form, and you could do it with just about any kind of editing situation that you want. And there's also all kinds of ways to structure the question in Microsoft Forms, so it doesn't have to be quite this setup if you wanted something a little more robust with different options, or you can even do a ranking system. There's all kinds of things you can do with Microsoft Forms. But the big picture thing that you need to have in order to set up what we're about to show you is you need to have a question that solicits an email response. So I got that set up, but then I didn't know where to go from there. And so I contacted Ashley about where she thought we should go. And I will hand it over to her to tell you where she suggested we go.
So Microsoft has tied into the Office 365 suite a product called Power Automate. And for those of you who may be using Office 365 through your institution, Power Automate doesn't necessarily show up on your list of apps. And so you may want to reach out to your IT department just to be sure that you do have access to Power Automate, or formerly Microsoft Flow. But it works really well for a lot of things. In the library, we've used it for streamlining vacation approvals and things like that. So there are lots of templates set up for all kinds of things that are typically used in big business. But what Catherine and I found is that there wasn't a setup or a template that worked perfectly for automating this process. So we had to create a new flow to do exactly what we needed to do. So this is the home screen for Power Automate. And if you go on the left and click Create, you can create an automatic flow from scratch. And so if you start from that blank and select automatic flow, and you can see it says it's triggered by an event. So the first thing that you want to do is name your flow. So in this instance, we're talking about rule assessments. And so it makes sense to name this after the form that we used to automate this process. And then you want to choose the trigger. For this, the trigger was a response being submitted to Microsoft Forms. And if you just type in Forms, it's going to bring up all of your options for different form products that tie into Power Automate. We're using the Microsoft product, and so you can see that the very first option is when a new response is submitted to Microsoft Form. That's going to be your triggering event to get this process started. And then you're simply going to click Create. Now we have our very first step in our automatic flow. So when a new response is submitted to this form, and you want to go through all of your forms that you may have created and select the form for which you are automating the process. And we're using it with this demo rule statement evaluation that Catherine just showed you. And you're going to want to click New Step. Okay. From there, again, we are looking for a forms response, because we are going to pull information out of those forms. So if you just type in forms again, we are looking for get response details, because after the response is submitted, we want Power Automate to pull the details out of that response. So again, in Form ID, we're going to select that demo because that's the form that we were looking for. And for response ID, you want to make sure that you're using this dynamic content over on the right, and you want the response ID. So it is going to pull individual responses out of the form and not lump them all together in some big crazy way to get us the information that we need. So now that we know that we're getting the response details out of our form, we want a new step. And the step that we're looking for in our automatic flow is to have the students whose work is being reviewed receive emails from their classmates as soon as the classmates have finished reviewing their product. And so you can type in email into choose action. You're going to see a lot of options down at the bottom. And the one that we have found that has worked most easily for this is that send an email notification version 3 that shows up at the top. You'll notice that it's not specific to Microsoft Outlook emails. In playing around with this, after Catherine first presented me with this problem, I found that for whatever reason, the formatting of the generic email notification response works a lot better than any of the ones that are specific to Outlook. So I do recommend that you use this email notification volume 3. In the to line, if you remember, if we go back to our form, we want the email to go directly to the person whose work is being evaluated. So it's the person whose work is being assessed. So in the whose work are you assessing, that's whose email it's going to go to. And then you can create the subject line of the email, and that's going to be consistent across the board. So if this is for a research and writing course, you may want to say research and writing, blah, blah, blah. In this case, we're going to just do rule statement evaluation. And then we're going to create the body of the email. So you may want to, you can make this as formal or as informal as you wanted. When we first sort of envisioned this, we did it in a little bit more of a traditional sense. So we did hello, and then whose work are you assessing? Again, because it's the person who's receiving the email who's going to get the greeting. So hello, this is your peer edit, right, from your classmate. And the classmate is the one who is doing the assessing, the person who filled out the form. So you can see it says, hello, whose work are you assessing? This is your peer edit form from the person who filled it out. I recommend having your form open in one screen and your flow open in another. That way you remember which questions you asked where, because without that in front of me, I had a really hard time remembering which questions I asked and who the email was going to go to and who the email was going to be from. And so this helps that by having it open in both screens so you can bounce back and forth. So after we did that, if we go back into the flow itself, so hello, this is your peer edit from blank. And the very first thing that was in that form was, is the rule written in a clear and concise manner? And we want the student who's receiving this to understand that that was the question that was asked. And so before we let them see what their peer editor said, we want to put some information in there that lets them know what question was being answered. So is the rule written in a clear and concise manner? Question mark. And then the answer from the peer reviewer is what's going to show up in that Microsoft form input field that's right there on the screen. And you can see you can bold the question, you can make the font bigger, you can change the color, right? You can even add live links and things like that if you wanted to. So there are a lot of options for manipulating the email itself on this screen. Okay. Is the rule written in a clear and concise manner? Does the rule apply to our legal issue? Is the next one. And again, you're going to ask the question and format the text however you want it so that the student receiving the email can clearly see what it looks like. The bolding seems to work nicely, right? Because it's pretty clear what the question and what the answer is. And then, do you have any suggestions for editing this document? And so for this, you might want to say your classmate had these suggestions. You know, the person reviewing your work had the following suggestions, right? And so you can title that however you want or list that however you want. And again, it's going to give that written out feedback so that the student who's receiving the peer review knows exactly what was being said and the suggestions from the classmate. And then you just want to save it and test it to make sure that it works. You can see that up on the right-hand corner there's a flow checker, and then there's a test. The flow checker goes through the flow piece by piece and lets you know if any of the data that was input, any of the different processes were done the wrong way. So if you put in the wrong type of content and somehow it doesn't know how to read it, that flow checker will tell you if there are any errors there. But then you can go ahead and you can test the flow directly from here to see how it works. So I'll perform the trigger action, we can click, and then we can test it. And so now we can go back into the demo and we can look at it and see how it works. So what is your name? Test name. We are going to assess Catherine's work right now. Okay. Does it apply to our legal issue? Yep. Is it written in a clear and concise manner? Yep. Do you have any suggestions? Nope. Everything is wonderful, of course, because Catherine wrote it, so obviously it's practically perfect in every way, and the response was submitted. Now, Catherine, you can see that it went through. It says your flow ran successfully, so we can see that everything worked as it was supposed to. And so now if Catherine opens her email, she should have that peer review email in her inbox. And we can see here, there's the email, right? Hello, Catherine, this is your peer edit. And you can see it's laid out exactly how we want it to be, with the questions in bold. The responses are in standard text, and it came right to her email with no issues. You may want to tell your students to look out for emails that come directly from Microsoft Power Apps and Power Automate. If it's internal to your institution, like ours was, there shouldn't be any issues with things going to junk or being put in quarantine, because it is an internal product. But you do want to let your students know. I know we have a lot of students who will have their school email automatically forwarded to a personal email address, and so sometimes things can get caught up in junk mail or spam. So they're going to want to be on the lookout for this. But the process overall is so much faster than trying to figure out how the students can provide peer feedback, like Catherine said, bouncing emails back and forth for a period of time.
Yes, and I actually tried it out in my class, and I've had a lot of success with it. My rule of thumb is to try to introduce as minimal tech as I have to my students, because the more layers of tech I throw at them, the more they're apt to get confused when I'm trying to teach them research and writing skills. And so I try to keep everything really simple, and I was a little nervous about rolling out a new tech process. But I simply put a link to the Microsoft Forms in my chat box for my online class, and they clicked on it, went right to the form, filled it out, no problem. The emails went through like a charm, and it worked really well. So the only old school thing I still had to do was have them exchange their initial writing piece with each other. And so some of them did that by email, some of them did that by uploading to the learning management system that we use, and so that people could read each other's work. But other than that, all of the peer editing was done seamlessly through this process, and I was able to have several people look at each person's papers, and so it allowed for a very quick turnaround if I wanted to have people peer exchange with more than one person.
And I'm planning on using this. I teach a class called Technology in Practice, where my students have to give a presentation at the end of the semester. And I plan on using this process to have my students provide feedback for each other on those presentations as well, because they can have the form open while their classmates are doing presentations and fill out feedback that can go immediately to the students. The other thing that we didn't mention in automating all of this stuff, it sort of appears as if you're losing the data and you wouldn't be able to go in and see what the students said to each other. That's not the case at all. So if you go into the form itself and then you go over to the responses, you get all of the information in an Excel spreadsheet that you would have otherwise, just by virtue of creating this form. And so you can see, right, what was said, who responded, how they responded, and the data that was provided, and you can download all of that in a spreadsheet. So you're not losing any of the raw data or any of the information that your students provided to one another. I think there is a little bit of reticence from some people to having students do things like this online, because you're worried about what they might say to each other. Maybe not, but we certainly live in a world where people feel emboldened to say things on the internet. And so this gives you access to all of the data, and you don't have to worry that your students are doing anything odd or inputting any weird information, because you do maintain access to all of the information. And you can see that the work was completed, what time they started it, what time they finished it, to make sure that they are doing the work when you've assigned it.
So it may seem overwhelming and complicated to be looking at things that sometimes only computer engineers look at, like Microsoft Flow and Power Automate, but it's actually a relatively simple system, especially if you follow it step by step according to this video. And it's so easy and so effective for the students that I highly recommend it.
Me too. So, and if you have any questions, I know we're happy to answer them and to help in any way that we can. I think we're all in this together. Things are weird, and the more we can help each other, the more easily we'll get through the semester.
And I couldn't have done it without the tech guru's help. So I don't want to take much credit for this. I just had the idea to do it, but certainly my partner in crime here was the person that was able to piece it all together for me. So hopefully this is helpful for other people, and will save you some time digging around like we spent, and we'll make it a pretty easy process.
Good luck with the rest of the semester.